Okay, so the final thing with immigration, and we talked about some of the challenges that immigrants face. One of the biggest challenges happens within the own family is people pass through what we're going to call the stages of immigration a little bit differently. Not everybody goes through these the same. These are not absolutes, but these are common patterns of how families and different members of the families kind of work through adjusting to a new culture. So when you talk about first stage or of immigration, you're usually talking about people who arrived as adults to the new country. Okay. So a first stage of an immigrant is somebody who gets to the United States after they're already older. And by older, again, you know, even people who arrive at the age of 15 are more likely to be like this than somebody who arrives when they're 5. And some of the characteristics is first of all, they will hold on to as much of their old culture as possible. They will be slower to adapt to their new culture. And in doing so, basically, things, especially think of one of the biggest ones is language skills. We know now through brain research that language skills are a lot easier to pick up when you're younger than when you are older. So for people who arrive, they're a lot less likely to pick up the new language and a lot less likely to use that new language often. First stage immigrants will still converse whenever possible in their native language because that's what they're comfortable with. So this oftentimes will make it difficult for them to adapt. And again, we talked about this for many immigrants, it's not about them, it's about their children. And so this first stage of immigrant, they're going to kind of get through life struggling in many cases to try to hold on to the old as much as possible, and they're going to struggle with the newer culture. Now, when you talk about the second stage, these are usually people who arrive as young children and the children of first stage immigrants. Okay. So this group composes people who either came when they were small or young, or people who were born to parents in this first stage. So they're born in the United States. So they have the very difficult job of, in their household, when they're at home, remember, their parents are holding on to their old culture as much as possible, still speaking the old language. But as they get old enough that they start going to school, start hanging around with other kids in the neighborhood, they're going to have a lot of pressure to act like everyone else. I mean, I think you all know as people, and specifically as kids, there's always a lot of pressure to fit in. So this group has a very difficult time because their parents have one way of acting and their friends and teachers have another way of acting. So this group tends to use the old culture at home. And I'm going to put maybe, we'll talk about that in a second. Oftentimes the second stage will embrace the new culture and really dive in and try to fit in. Oftentimes people in this stage will be very hurt if somebody identifies that they're different or they're an immigrant or they're and this changed over time. I mean, if you looked at a school, if you went to a school in the early 1900s, there was a lot of pressure. Kids were punished, and remember back then they were punished often physically. If you were caught speaking your native language at school, in many cases you would have been punished for that. The school systems really took it as their job to Americanize people, and they weren't very nice about it at one point. If you look at some of our students wandering the halls of Bondwell Elementary, who are learning a new culture, you'll notice that obviously they're encouraged to learn English and do things in English, but we probably have not seen anyone who was beaten for using their native language in school. So that is just something that is very different now. But this can often cause more conflict with parents than normal. So imagine among all the other things that you may disagree with your parents on about curfew or chores or what time you should get up or when you should do your homework, now you also need to decide, what language should you be speaking. And what makes this even a little bit trickier for these kids is for the adults, as these kids grow up and they're comfortable with English and they're comfortable with the way things are working in the United States, they are often the ones who, okay, we're going to the bank to talk about a mortgage. The parents will bring the children with because the children understand the language better. You're going to buy a car. You're going to any of those types of situations. The kids end up being spokesmen for their parents. And again, that's a great way that they can be helpful, but I don't know about you, but in most households, at some point when kids are fighting with their parents, the parents ultimately play the "I buy your food, I pay your bills, I give you a place to sleep, you'll follow my rules," and that can get turned a little upside down in these households. Imagine the parents making that threat to the child, and then the child having to go, "Well, fine, I won't take you to the bank. I won't help you pay the bills. I won't help you do the things that you need me to do." So it switches that up a little bit. It can make things more difficult. And sometimes that's even in the same family. As you may know with brothers and sisters, some people in this situation will thrive. They'll grow up very fast. They'll be very responsible, very mature, and others will rebel more. And that can certainly go on and on. But this second stage is, again, it can sometimes last for a generation or two. But you would have often seen people trying very hard to fit in, and so on. Now, eventually, you work through that, and this is often now people who have the third stage is going to be people born in the U.S., and this can be to second generation parents or later. And what tends to happen here is now you're raised in the new culture, and people will begin to embrace or hold on to some of their old cultures, some of their history. And it becomes easier to be proud of your history and be proud of your different culture background when you're comfortably in the new culture. And that's something that you would see, that people are beginning to be proud of their history and they want to make sure they still learn the language of their grandparents and so on. And again, none of this is easy. Everybody, you may have somebody who arrived as a 30-year-old and said, forget it, I'm learning English right away and I'm going to fit in right away. And you may have people, in some of these other stages that don't follow this exactly. But just a few, and you could spend hours on this with examples and so on. Just one more challenge is, how do you handle the culture you had and the culture you're now a part of? And how do you blend those together? And what should we hang on to and what do we need to let go? Just another challenge that was faced by families when they got here. So, and still today, like I said, we have students in our hallway who are in this process right now. Their parents may have immigrated here. Maybe they even immigrated here. And they have to figure out how to fit in. So.